There is much outrage about so-called targeting in Washington these days, as in the IRS targeting of political groups' applications for 501c4 status, applications all of which should have just been denied, but in fact all of which were actually approved. Congress heard from the so-called victims of the so-called targeting today. You heard them lying about it in the last segment, about their suffering, about the notion that they live in a tyranny, which they don't. They lied to Congress without any inhibitions whatsoever about their so-called suffering. It is important to remember that not one of these so-called victims suffered anything. None of them lost anything. In fact, they all got exactly what they wanted from the government. They got their approval of their fake 501c4s. Washington can summon fake tears for fake victims of government, but Washington completely ignores real victims of government, including the millions of victims of government described in a new report proving how America's war on marijuana targets black people in this country. Here are the arrest rates for marijuana possession for the first decade of the 21st century in the United States of America. What you're seeing there is that black people who actually consume somewhat less marijuana than white people are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white people. This huge racial bias in marijuana arrests exists in all regions of your country. These marijuana arrests are ruining lives, making it impossible for some people to keep their jobs, making it impossible for some young people to go to college. The American law enforcement urge to arrest marijuana users marches on, even while some states move ever closer to legalization of marijuana. So why are cops doing this? You know that by now, most police officers in America have probably, at minimum, tried marijuana themselves. We know that the President of the United States used marijuana and enjoyed marijuana in high school and college, like pretty much every high school and college kid I've ever known. We know that plenty of members of the cabinet and federal judges and members of Congress and senators have admitted to marijuana. And people nominated for federal confirmation have admitted to marijuana use in their FBI background checks before their confirmations in the United States Senate. And many of them were confirmed unanimously. What we know, what all of those things tell us, is that marijuana possession and marijuana use should not screw up anyone's life in any way. But in this country, where the president and so many other distinguished high achievers have proven that marijuana use is a perfectly normal rite of passage for young people and far less harmful in heavy usage than the legal killers, alcohol and tobacco, we still have a marijuana arrest every 37 seconds. And the states spend over $3.6 billion a year enforcing marijuana possession laws. This isn't dealing we're talking about here. This is possession. The states that have trouble funding their university systems and their public schools are wasting over $3.6 billion a year arresting people for marijuana possession. That is a crime against sanity, no matter who they are arresting, but it is also a racist government enterprise operated in plain sight by local government, state government, and yes, the federal government. Police officers all over the country are incentivized in various ways to keep their arrest numbers up, to meet their quotas. And the easiest way for many of them to do that is to simply drive into black communities and stop and frisk black people, which they do here in New York City as an official sanctioned policy of the department. There is money in those arrests, big money, federal money. The federal government has a program that is specifically directed at funding to enforce drug laws. All drug arrests, including misdemeanors such as marijuana possession, must be reported to the federal government in order to receive these funds. In other words, the more arrests, the more money a police department gets from the feds. Professor Philip Goff of UCLA told the New York Times, whenever federal funding agencies encourage law enforcement to meet numerical arrest goals instead of public safety goals, it will likely promote stereotype-based policing, and we can expect these sorts of racial gaps. That's a very polite and professorial way of putting it, racial gaps. There is a way to stop the war on marijuana possession. There is a way to stop this overtly racist government program, a racist government program that is supported by every level of American government, local, state, and federal. And the way to stop this racist program dead in its tracks is to have American law enforcement distribute a fair share of marijuana arrests to white America. Black people are 13% of the American population, according to the census. White people are 78% of the population, according to the census. So there are 6 times more white people than black people in America. So if white people were actually 6 times more likely to be arrested than black people, if white people were just doing their fair share of suffering in the war on marijuana, then young white people would take to the streets the way they took to the streets during the Vietnam War. They would end that war on marijuana. They would march on Congress. They would be heard by Congress. They would testify to Congress. Their parents would testify to Congress. They would shed tears over how unfair the punishments are in the war on marijuana. And American police departments would have to find another way to make money from the federal government. White America would not allow the government to do that to its children. They would not allow it to do what this government is doing right now, doing tonight, to black America. in the war on marijuana. White America's protests would drown out the fake tears of that Republican congressmen are now shedding for fake sufferers in the so-called IRS scandal. White America would make it Washington's first order of business to stop ruining their children's lives with pointless, cruel marijuana arrests. But American law enforcement knows. They know that that's exactly what would happen. And they don't want to upset their federal government cash cow. And so American law enforcement continues its apartheid system of marijuana law enforcement, and Washington's fake outrage about targeting will stay confined to the fake IRS scandal, and Washington will do nothing to stop the racist targeting of black people in the war on marijuana possession. A war that we can only hope that one day soon we will be able to look back on in shame.